welcome back. Today I thought we'd do something once again a little different. I'm still going to be reading to you today, but I'm not going to be reading one of my books. I have a very good friend. She is in my writers group, the Authors Roundtable Society. Her name is B. Ellen Gardner. That's actually her pen name. I'm not going to tell you her real name because if she wanted you to know it, she'd put it on her books. But she's a wonderful, wonderful friend. I've known her for years. She writes amazing books. And today I thought I'd read a chapter from one of hers. I'm going to be incorporating her works into these YouTube videos. I'm still waiting for one of her books. I had it. It's called Shay's Song. I have it, but we're waiting for the new cover, which I actually designed, and it's actually also up for a cover design award, or a beautiful cover award, which is really, really cool. And not to plug myself or anything, but this is my YouTube channel, so I'm going to. I've actually designed 4 other of her covers, including The Lamplighter, which is the chapter I'll be reading today. When Warriors Cried, which is a companion novel to her first A Trail of 20 Winters, which I think that's really beautiful. I didn't take any of these pictures, by the way. She told me what she wanted, what her ideas were, and so I went out and found some pictures, or in some instances she would provide them, like with these. These books are her poetry books. She wrote them for her grandchildren. The first is called Finding Beauty, which she wrote for her granddaughters, and that's actually her granddaughter on the cover. And then The Jukebox Boys, which was written for her grandsons, and those are her 4 grandsons on the cover. And she sent me the pictures of the kids, and thanks to a whole semester of Photoshop class in grad school, I was able to put these together, and I was actually really proud of them. I think they're beautiful. They're great, great books, and I'll be reading some selections later on from them as well. These are poetry and short story collections. So yeah. And finally, she also has a book called Guardian Spirit. I did not design this cover, but I really, really like this book because it's all cool and paranormal. So I might be reading from that as well. But today, like I said, we're going to start with The Lamplighter. And The Lamplighter is about a young woman named Hannah who is recovering from the devastating loss of losing her husband and children in a car accident. And the one light in her life is this lady who lives across the street from her, or her next door neighbor. Her name is Grace. And Hannah soon meets Grace's grandson, who is also struggling in life. So it's a really beautiful tale of hope and life after tragedy, I guess. So without further ado, I would like to read to you the first chapter of The Lamplighter by B. Ellen Gardner. Chapter 1. Andy Paget winced as he drove down the rural Texas highway that led to Nana Paget's house. The road was under construction and threatened to damage his newly painted 1972 Chevy pickup. The Chevy had been a gift from his paps just before he died, a day short of Andy's 16th birthday. He treated the old truck like it was gold, and the thought of ever replacing it never crossed his mind. He intended to keep it forever. His ex-wife Jean always referred to it as his mistress, because he spent so much time and money working on it and repairing it. Its fresh new paint job, Carnal Red, had been an extravagance he had lent himself after the divorce. This extravagance had royally ticked off Jean because she no longer had control where he spent his money. If he wanted to go into debt, it was his business. Andy smiled smugly as he recalled the look on Jean's face when he first picked up the boys in the newly painted Chevy. He heard loose rocks beat against the bottom of his truck, and his smile faded. "Just great," he murmured to himself. "This is just great. the beginning of a beautiful day in Blossom, Texas. Blossom, a small East Texas town with a population of just over 1,000, had been his Nana Paget's home since Andy was 15. Before that, Nana and Paps had lived in the country in the county just south of Blossom on a 20-acre farm. As a boy, Andy had spent every summer and every free weekend with his Paps and Nana on their farm, helping with the crops and the animals. Even though Andy went to school near Dallas, where his parents lived, he knew that someday he would be a farmer, just like his Paps. Andy brushed the tears that began to fill his bloodshot eyes as he recalled the painful, dark period when his dreams started to slip away. It began the day his Paps and Nana sold their farm because of Paps' declining health and moved to Blossom. Less than a year later, Paps died. The doctor said he died from complications due to a stroke. Andy knew differently. He knew that Paps had died the moment he left his farm and the life he loved so well. Andy thought of Nana. He hadn't taken care of her the way he had promised Paps he would. Truth was, he missed Paps too much, and Nana was a constant reminder of what he had lost when Paps died. It was too painful, so he left the duties of taking care of Nana to the rest of his family. When Andy married shortly out of high school, he drifted even further from his promise. There were his usual excuses. He had a new job at Peary's, a Dallas grocery store that kept him busy. He and Jean had just had their first child, a son, and later 2 more sons followed. One year turned into 2, and then 3, and before he realized it, nearly 15 years had gone by. He recently learned that Nana's health was declining, and she wasn't getting around as well. A lump filled his throat. Now he wished his family had visited more often. He rubbed his forehead. He felt as if his life was dealing him a series of bad hands. This last hand, his divorce from Jean, had almost killed him. He always imagined that he would be married to Jean forever. He thought he would be married and working at Peary's, where he recently had been made assistant manager. He laughed aloud. Now even his job was uncertain. Talk around the store was that a larger chain might buy out the grocery. If that happened, Andy had no idea what direction his career would take. His head was throbbing now, a consequence of having too little sleep and possibly too much to drink last night. It was an occurrence that had been happening more frequently these days. He knew he had to get control of himself. Each day he vowed this would be the day, but then life would throw him a curveball, and he would be back to square one. He reached into his glove box and pulled out a bottle of Tylenol. His hands were shaking, and his nerves were on edge. A few days ago, Jean threw another lightning bolt at him. He said that she was considering taking him back to court. She wanted full custody of their 3 boys and possibly supervised visits. She ran on about his drinking and women chasing being out of control, and him not being a strong role model for them. What was she thinking? He never drank in front of his boys, and the only girlfriend he ever brought around was Liz. Since Jean approved of Liz, he had no idea what she was thinking. Maybe it was because he broke it off with Liz a while back. He didn't know. He only knew that he loved his boys and he was a good father. If she wanted to take him to court, then bring it on. The thought of not seeing them on a regular basis was unthinkable. Nothing meant more to him than his boys. He would give his life for them. The thought of Jean and her recent actions cut him deeply. Whatever she thought of him, he didn't care, but to take his boys away? This divorce wasn't his idea. Ripping his family apart wasn't his idea. She was the one who wanted her freedom. She wanted to grow in her career. His heart raced. He and Jean had been together since they were 16. They grew up together. She said that they had been drifting apart for years. Andy gripped the wheel tightly. Maybe she had been drifting, but he always loved her. Still did. He would take her back tomorrow if it meant having his family together again. Before he could indulge further in self-pity, he saw the turn to Blossom and his mind focused on driving. In a few minutes, he would be at Nana's house. A gentle comfort filled him as he recalled the Nana of past days, who had fussed over him and made his life better just by her presence. Andy felt a sense of peace for the first time in months. Nana would make things better. Hannah Martindale woke up feeling 60 instead of 34. Just when she had finally fallen asleep last night, the intrusive morning showed its cruel face through her window. It teased at her, pretending to be a promise of a beautiful day, when all along it was a culprit, hovering over her like a dark cloud that never quite went away. Cautiously, her eyes scanned the stream of light. As if programmed, Hannah pulled herself from her bed and went about her daily routine, brushing her teeth, haphazardly moving a brush through her unruly hair, dressing into an outfit she may or may not have worn yesterday. She tripped over an area rug made inside her bathroom, forcing her to look up into her full-length mirror. Hannah panicked when she saw the image reflected. A stranger was staring at her. As quickly as her panic had come, it left. She touched her face gently. The familiar features, though more aged, were recognizable. A funny thing about panic, it can take you to another realm of reality in the blink of an eye. One thing Hannah knew, it always brought her back. Each dark day proved this. Putting on a pot of fresh coffee, she looked outside her kitchen window and saw 2 sparrows dancing around her abandoned bird bath, where yesterday a late evening shower had filled it. Hannah felt a piercing pain. Had she really picked out that very bird bath and planted roses in the garden nearby? A vision of lush flowers blooming where weeds now overran filled her mind. She could almost smell their sweetness. She sighed. That was a lifetime ago, and she was another Hannah. Once outgoing and vibrant, today she barely had the inclination to recall what she had once been. Still, Hannah clung to the fragments of her former life, hopeful that some miracle might release her from her self-imposed bondage. Almost immediately, dread soured her belly. No miracle could change her past. No miracle could bring the life she once had back. Hannah looked at the clock that ticked. She waited. For what? For Grace to call or to come over? Ah, yes, sweet, precious Grace Paget, her neighbor and confidant. Grace always called her about this time. She would call and break the dreaded silence. Hannah resisted picking up the phone and calling Grace. She might be sleeping, and she knew she needed her help. She had been so tired lately. Grace hadn't been well. For well over 3 years, Hannah had rarely left her home. The occasional time she had been forced from her house left her in such a state of torment she was powerless to do anything for days. The ordeal set her back both physically and emotionally, so she avoided them at all costs. This consequently sent her into a deeper state of confinement, and she remained literally housebound, except for her night trips to the front porch and her visits to Grace's house. More often than not, Grace would find her way to Hannah's house, and the two would spend the greater part of their morning drinking coffee and discussing any news Grace had to tell. Grace's news and stories were the highlights of Hannah's day. When they didn't visit, her days were often long and dark. Grace was one of Hannah's few links to an outside world that had been so cruel to her. Hannah didn't realize it, but she was quickly becoming Grace's lifeline as well. They were an odd pair. Grace, almost 80, where Hannah was 34. Both were widows. Both had lost a child. Both were restricted to their homes. Grace by age and declining health, and Hannah by fear and tragedy. Both women clung to the past except for the occasional times when they were forced into the present. The most prevalent concern to Hannah was Grace's health. She saw her friend faltering more each day, her slow walk, her speech, and her failing memory. She feared Grace would have to be hospitalized soon, and then what would she do? She prayed God would give her the courage to be the friend Grace deserved, and that she wouldn't let her fear abandon Grace in her time of need. Hannah's thoughts were interrupted when she saw a red truck pull into Grace's driveway. A tall, dark-haired man got out and made his way to Grace's backyard. Hannah remembered that Andy would be coming to help Grace out this weekend. Grace was so excited, because it had been months since she had seen Andy. In reality, it had been years since Grace and Andy had really visited. Hannah watched Andy intently. He was not the person she remembered from years past. She first met Andy a few months after she moved next door to Grace. She was 19 and almost a new mother. Andy was 18, a cocky senior in high school who was near the brink of manhood. He swore too much and gave his father and mother bits with his rash behavior. He had always challenged his parents and done things the hard way, almost failing school, skipping college to go to work, marrying right out of high school, and starting a family shortly after. Although Andy was rash and impulsive, he was also the most endearing of Grace's grandsons. He loved deeply, giving his heart and soul to something or someone he deemed of value. He wasn't afraid of work and had made a good living for his family. Grace always said that he wore his heart on his sleeve and loved unconditionally. Hannah studied him as he knocked on Grace's back door. She wondered when he had gone from a reckless boy to a responsible man. She had to guess it was during the lost years of her life. Just then, Hannah saw Grace open the door and watch the two embrace. Grace was reluctant to release Andy, but she did as they went inside. Hannah understood then that Grace would not be visiting today. She was okay with this because she knew how much this visit meant to Grace. Usually Grace's other grandsons, Charlie or Ben, came to help their grandmother on the weekends. Sometimes they would take her into their houses for the weekend. Lately, they just visited because Grace didn't get around as well. Of all her grandsons, Hannah knew that Grace favored Andy, simply because Andy reminded her so much of her late husband, George Paget. Grace's back door slammed and Andy reappeared. He stood in a slump, staring in no apparent direction. Hannah edged toward the window and watched him. He seemed lost, and her heart tugged for his recent sorrow. She understood all too well what it was like to be alone, what it was like to feel alone. While their situations weren't the same, he had lost his family. Andy stood for some time before he made his way to Grace's shed, where he found her mower. Minutes later, she heard the hum of the motor, and the smell of cut grass filled the late morning air. Hannah closed her blinds and slid silently once more into the obscure corner of her world. Andy saw the two boys run suspiciously behind Hannah Martindale's house. He let the mower idle while he followed them around the back. Andy guessed them to be around 10 or so, just a few years younger than his oldest son, Matthew. He watched as the boys dug around in Miss Martindale's garden, or what used to be a garden. While the heat from the sun had absorbed most of the water from yesterday's rain, the boys managed to find a muddy section in the garden. He let out a chuckle when they started walking in the mud, giggling and smudging each other's clothes. Just as Andy was about to resume his mowing, he saw the larger boy ball some mud in his fist and throw it at Hannah Martindale's kitchen door. The small boy followed his lead. Andy saw a fleeting shadow emerge at the door. The boys threw a second handful and shouted out cruelly, "Crazy Hannah Banana! Crazy Hannah Banana!" Before he realized what he was doing, Andy ran toward the boys and grabbed them by their shirts. While he walked them toward Miss Martindale's door, he wasn't sure. He just knew he couldn't let them get by talking to her this way. "I like a fun time same as the next guy," he said to them harshly, "but I draw the line at cruelty. You boys are going to apologize to Miss Martindale. You hear me?" "I'm not," the larger one spat and then squirmed out of Andy's hold. Somewhat stunned by the boy's strength, Andy said little when he ran off. Still holding the other boy by his shirt, Andy used his free hand to knock on Miss Martindale's door. During their wait, Andy quizzed the boy. "What's your name, son?" "I ain't tellin'." Andy clutched him tighter. "Some friend you have. He left you to take all the blame. Are you always going to be a follower?" "That was mighty cruel what you two did and said." The boy looked at Andy confused. "Why? Everyone knows that old Lady Martindale is crazy. She ain't been right for years." "That's not the point. You invaded her privacy and did harm to her property. Besides, if truth be known, you more than likely made her feel bad inside." Andy knocked the second time. "She won't answer," the boy said in a matter-of-fact tone. "She don't ever answer the door. Why, me and Jimmy have been coming." "Oh, I see," Andy interrupted, somewhat amused. "You boys have been here before and probably playing your same mean pranks, haven't you?" The boy shrugged. "Maybe." "Do me a favor," Andy said. "Leave Miss Martindale alone. If you promise me this, I will let you go, and I won't tell your parents what you did today." "You don't know me, and you don't know my parents," the boy spat, not too sure of himself. Andy grinned. "It's a small town, son. There aren't too many people to know in a small town. It would only take a few calls." The boy thought for a moment and then answered, "Okay." Andy loosened his grip on the boy, and within seconds, he could only see the flash of his jeans as he ran out of sight. Andy had to grin. He knocked one more time on Hannah's door, but there was still no answer. Not blaming her one bit for not answering, Andy made his way to the mower and the unfinished lawn. Hannah stood within inches of her door and followed Andy's form through her window until he disappeared. When he came into view again, Hannah watched his strong stride as he pushed the mower across Grace's back lawn. A stirring of emotions overcame her, and she recalled the unexpected compassion Andy had shown toward her just moments ago. "Thank you for standing up for me," she whispered. "It's not often someone defends the honor of crazy Hannah Banana." Hannah made Grace and Andy an apple pie. It wasn't fresh because she didn't have fresh apples, but even so, she turned out a delectable pie using her grandmother's recipe. It had once been said that Hannah's desserts were the best in Blossom. Until today, it had been years since she had baked for anyone other than herself. As she pulled the pie from the oven, its sweet juices circled the air, and an intimate feeling filled her spirit. Arms wrapped around her waist and lips nestled within her neck. Hannah closed her eyes and saw Sammy's face. Her late husband was smiling at her, enticing her to love him. "Sammy," she whispered. Within that same moment of pleasure and desire, Hannah felt a sharp pain in her heart. Sammy wasn't really with her. but in memory. He was dead, buried over 4 years ago, and ripped from her life forever. "My love," she cried, "what brought you here today?" Then she knew. It was the apple pie. Sammy loved her apple pies. They had always been his favorite. Why today of all days had she done such a thing? She thought it would be a kind deed for Grace and her grandson. Sweet, gracious Andy. Of course, she thought. The way he handled those boys today, so strong and in command, reminded me of Sammy. Hannah sat on her kitchen table staring at the pie. She heard Andy's voice. If truth be known, you more than likely made her feel bad inside. Hannah felt her eyes grow moist. Oh, Andy, if only you knew. I rarely feel anything but lost inside. Hannah eyed the pie. It was cooked and she wanted Grace and Andy to have it. She wanted to thank Andy not only for the incident with the boys, but after he had finished mowing Grace's lawn, he mowed hers. This was something Ben or Charlie had never done. Before she lost her nerve, she picked up her phone and called Grace. "Hannah," her elderly neighbor's voice soothed. "I was just about to call you. I thought it would be a good time with Andy in the shower. Oh, Hannah, Andy told me about those horrid boys. I'm so sorry, dear. Oh, and one of them was the youngest Renfro boy, Benny. Paul and Sue would be mortified. I have a good mind to call them right now." Grace let it go. "We both know it wasn't the first time, and it sure won't be the last. They aren't the reason I'm calling you. I made a pie. For you and Andy. He mowed my grass, you know." "Oh, how thoughtful. But Andy wanted to mow your lawn. He's always been such a worker. And my, how that boy loves to be outdoors, just like his paps. He's like his paps, you know. The way he holds his pain inside of him. I'm so worried about him, Hannah. It's been well over a year since his divorce, and he can't move on. Now this thing with Jean and the boys. It can't be easy," Hannah consoled. "How are the boys?" "Who really knows? They don't come around me much. Divorce is hard, Grace. It's like a death almost." "You're so insightful, Hannah, but we must not talk about this anymore. Andy's coming now. He gets so upset." "So you made us a pie, did you? I'll send Andy over to get it. Better yet, bring it over and have dinner with us. I know Andy would like a nice visit with you." Hannah froze in her tracks. "Dinner? Oh, heavens no, Grace. I couldn't do that to you. You know, I'm not up to it. But I do want to thank Andy." "I do understand, Hannah, but Andy isn't a stranger." Hannah wanted to say that he was to her, but she didn't. When they hung up, Hannah mustered the courage to take the pie next door before Grace talked Andy into coming over. She tapped on the back door gently, laid the pie on the step, and ran quickly back to the security of her home. Grace moved outside and picked up the pie. "Such a gentle bird," Grace said to herself. She knew what courage it took for Hannah to make this gesture. Anything beyond the norm was such an ordeal for her friend. "Oh, my sweet Hannah, you just don't realize your strength. You're stronger than you think you are." She looked toward Hannah's house for some time before going inside. "Dear Lord, make her strong. I know I won't always be here to watch after her." Grace convinced Andy to stay for the night. Truth was, he had no better plans, and being with Nana had restored him somewhat. Listening to her stories about Paps and his mom and dad took the sting away from his present situation. Long after midnight, Andy lay awake, lying in the very bed he had slept in as a teenager. Nothing in Blossom changed, not even the still May nights. It was as if Blossom and the surrounding country were frozen in time. Andy walked to the open window and lit up a cigarette, an occasional vice he afforded himself at the end of a long day. He also knew Nana would have... I'm sorry. I have kind of like a weird crick in my neck, and it's kind of distracting me. I don't know what it is. Maybe I've been sleeping on it weird. All kinds of fun things happen after you pass 30. He knew Nana would have a fit if she found him smoking, but he also knew she was fast asleep. The air was close, and his throat was dry. With a million thoughts swimming in his head, he wasn't really focused on any in particular one. He just stared out the window. His eyes drifted down the dark street with the rows of lamplight shining reminiscent of an age long ago. He happened to hear the front door of Hannah Martindale's house open, and it caught his attention. He thought of the pie she had made for dinner. She had made it to thank him for mowing the lawn and for reprimanding those boys today. What did they know about crazy? To some folks, Andy had been known to be a little crazy. Jane and her parents thought so. Even Nana had said that anyone who drank his life away the way Andy had done at the beginning of his divorce was just plumb crazy. She told him that no woman was worth it. Andy thought of his boys. He missed being a part of their daily lives. This every other weekend crap was for the birds. Jean, he thought, now she's crazy. Just then, Andy heard what he thought was humming, and seconds later, he saw Hannah walking down her front sidewalk to her mailbox. The lamplight between Nana's house and hers exposed her figure. Along with the humming, he watched as she moved back to her house. She was fairly skipping as she lightly glided into her porch, where she sat down on a swing. What the hell? He thought. Fear keeps her bound during the day, but she comes out at night, skipping and humming? Maybe she is crazy. A vision of the woman Andy had known years ago formed in his imagination. Hannah Martindale had once been beautiful. So beautiful, in fact, Andy on numerous occasions had indulged in fleeting fantasies about her. Oh, it was nothing serious, but her tall, slim form, flowing black hair, and large brown eyes demanded a man look twice. She was a classic beauty, like Audrey Hepburn, and just as untouchable. Her smile was slanted, and she had a small dimple on one cheek. She had a soft, gentle voice, and when she spoke, her southern drawl flowed eloquently from her lips. She was captivating and desirable, but elusive. While a man might have passing thoughts of being near her, he understood she was off limits. Andy had always been appreciative of Hannah's beauty. Even though Hannah was slightly older than he was, she always came off to Andy as much older because of her carriage. Tonight, his curiosity piqued. He was experiencing those same familiar sensations. In the past, Andy had been so busy with his family and work, and Hannah with her family, her church, and charities, that their paths rarely crossed. Sometimes he would hear tidbits about her through Nana or his parents, but the interest wasn't there. He had his life, and she had hers. In his life, he had maybe a dozen conversations with Hannah, and these were always superficial. Just once, he had an in-depth visit with her. It was ironically several weeks before the car accident that took her family from her and destroyed her life. Her husband, who was a high school principal in Blossom, was considering taking a position near Dallas as a principal. It would mean more money, but would also mean uprooting his family. Hannah asked him about the schools near Dallas, the shopping centers, and the general atmosphere. She was apprehensive, having raised her children in such a small town. They were rooted, and she knew the change would be drastic. What he recalled most about the conversation was just how devoted she was to his Nana, considering her to be much like the mother she never had. This always gave Andy comfort, knowing Hannah was next door, watching over his Nana. Through the window, he heard her soft humming echoing in the night. He closed his eyes and let the sound ease away his own misfortune. He felt immensely lifted. Crazy? He thought to himself. No, not crazy. Just misunderstood. Oh, Hannah, we're all running and hiding from something. We're all one step from crazy. So that's chapter 1 of The Lamplighter by B. Ellen Gardner. I really like stories set in small towns. I grew up in Dallas, so they have the Dallas and they have the small town. I grew up in Dallas, and I love driving up to the Sherman, Denison, Pottsboro area. I love the atmosphere of a small town. I love the sunsets. I love the trees. I love being near a lake. I love the old buildings. I love the simplicity. So it's always fun to have an escape. And especially now when can't leave the house, it's nice to have a literary escape. So I will be posting the links to The Lamplighter down below if you'd like to check them out, or if you'd like to check it out, please do. And have a happy Thursday, y'all. Bye!